Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
There are moments when
everything seems to be moving along a clear path, and then without any warning, the entire situation changes. Not a little.
Not gradually.
Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. Circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard. By the way, it's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions.
It changes completely. And that's exactly what this feels like. The moment the possibility of a sentence extension enters the discussion, the entire atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, it's no longer just about what's happening. It's about what may not be ending anytime soon. And that distinction carries serious weight. People understand controversy. They understand accusations. They understand investigations that seem to drag on forever. That's familiar territory. But an extension feels different. It feels like escalation. It feels as though the situation isn't settling down. It's becoming even more complicated. And that perception alone is enough to change everything. Now, the conversation is no longer centered on possibility. It's focused on direction. Where is this heading? Why is it heading there? What changed? The problem is that nobody has clear answers. Yet instead of slowing a reaction, that uncertainty makes it stronger. Because when information, no hesitation.
Over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say
it is incomplete.
Is incomplete. People rarely wait for the full picture. They begin filling in the blanks themselves. That's exactly what's happening right now. Let's look at why this has such a strong impact. A situation already carrying pressure suddenly gains another layer. Not just pressure from public attention, but pressure that appears to come from within an official system. When that happens, it sends a message and not a subtle one. It signals that things haven't been resolved, that events aren't slowing down, and that whatever's unfolding remains active, ongoing, and far from over. People recognize that immediately. They're not only listening to the words being used, they're reacting to what those words seem to represent. Then comes a divide. One side hears this and immediately treats it as confirmation to them. It's proof that things are getting worse. Proof that the situation is heading in a negative direction.
It's going downhill. No hesitation.
If all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility, such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a...
No pause.
Pause. Just complete acceptance of the most dramatic interpretation. Then there's the other side pushing back with equal force. They argue that there isn't enough information available, that important context is missing, and that many people are reacting to a headline rather than the full story. And they're not entirely wrong. Without complete details, uncertainty remains. But uncertainty rarely spreads. Strong narratives do. As a result, uncertainty gets pushed aside, while extreme interpretations take center stage. The discussion is no longer calm. It's being debated, challenged, and pulled in multiple directions by people working with incomplete information. That's where the chaos begins. There isn't one version of the story anymore. There are many, and all of them are moving at the same time. Now, let's talk about timing, because timing is never meaningless in situations like this. If this conversation is happening now,
the chances of the bail application being granted on appeal were less because of the different standard. And also, we know the application has gotten worse because of Diddy's own conduct while he's in prison. We've talked about how he's used other inmates' pack numbers and he's made these three-way calls allegedly, trying to intimidate witnesses. So not only do you have the bail denied because he's a risk of flight or danger to the community, but also because he's trying to obstruct justice and affect the integrity of the proceedings.
A lot going on even behind bars for Diddy. I know we talked, you and I believe, about those allegations that he was using other inmates' phone calls or their lines, you just mentioned it, to talk about things so that prosecutors couldn't listen in. I'm sure that federal prosecutors are still keeping a very close eye on P. Diddy, his communication with the outside world, as it were. Do you think they're going to use any of this information at the coming trial?
I do, because if you're a prosecutor, you have to anticipate the defense in the case. And the defense in this case is clear that the sexual contact happened, but it was consensual. So Diddy's defense team is going to do everything they can to convince the jury that even though the freak-offs happened, these were consensual sexual acts by adults. So how can they do this? They can do it through cross-examination to try to show that the victims who are testifying, they're lying. They can try to pay off the victims, either through an outright bribe or a civil settlement. I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything, but these are all possibilities. The government has raised the possibility that Diddy's trying to intimidate the witnesses so they change their testimony. Because obviously, we know, it doesn't matter what the victims say in their civil complaints or what they told the FBI or prosecutors. They have to take the stand, testify, and tell the jurors the exact same thing. So if these victims go sideways, either before or during trial, that really helps Diddy and the defense team.
Hey, all you, I think this is going to be huge, something we've talked about, and it's really highly anticipated because they're the ones who were victims in this situation. Is the defense really going to attack that? The fact that these people are bearing all, it's probably going to be very emotional for them or very difficult to talk about on a public stage. Do you think that's something that the defense is really going to focus on?
I think so. We know, at least in the civil complaints, one of the defense strategies has been to out the victim. Some of them want to remain anonymous, right? And the defense in almost every case has filed a motion to unmask the identity of the accusers because they think on the defense side that maybe people will be more hesitant to come and talk about their sexual assault or sexual abuse at a very public trial. It's hard for victims of abuse. So I do think the defense is banking on that. And
Something behind the scenes changed in a way that pushed the issue into public view. And once that happens, it rarely stays contained. It spreads quickly. Reactions begin piling up one after another. One post becomes hundreds. One interpretation becomes 10 different theories. And before anyone can slow things down and ask what has actually been confirmed, the discussion is already racing ahead. That's the environment we're seeing right now. Not clarity, not resolution, just constant movement. Think about the psychological effect of something like this. Because this isn't only information, it's perception. And perception is powerful. When people hear about the possibility of a sentence extension, even as a reported claim, it triggers an immediate reaction. It makes the entire situation feel more serious, more significant, more final. Even if none of it has been officially confirmed, that feeling alone changes. No hesitation.
You know that some of these acts happened years, sometimes even decades ago. So they're going to point out inconsistencies in any statements that they're making and argue that this shows that they're lying. And we've already seen it with a couple of the victims who have given statements already to the media. One was an interview with CNN. Another victim gave an interview with NBC. That victim, of course, being the Alabama woman who accused both Diddy and Jay-Z. And after those interviews, the reporters and the media outlets saw some inconsistencies, things that were incorrect in terms of maybe the dates or the locations of where things happened. And I think the defense is going to use that to say, well, these people aren't mistaken. They're outright lying. And the reason they're lying is they want fame, they want money. So we're going to see a very aggressive cross-examination in this case here.
The story that you brought up about Jane Doe, the woman who's accusing Diddy and Jay-Z from back in the year 2000 when she was 13 years old, that one's huge because a judge in that case just ruled she could remain Jane Doe. So for now, at least, we don't know her name. If that's the case for some of these people that the government is going to call, how will Diddy's team prepare for cross-examination if they're not sure exactly who they are or what the experience was?
So it's a little bit different in remaining anonymous in a civil case. Ultimately, if a case does go to trial, that victim will have to take the stand and testify in a public courtroom. Now, with respect to what the government is going to do in the criminal case, right? The government is not going to call more than 100 victims. That just doesn't make sense, right? The government is going to pick maybe their 5 to 10 best victims. Obviously, we know the best of all is going to be Cassie Ventura, just because there's a video and she was with Diddy for more than a decade. So she's their star witness. But after that, you want some other victims who are telling the same story of physical and sexual violence. So they're going to want victims that they think are telling consistent cases, victims that won't be beat up too much on cross-examination. Maybe that's a bad pun to use, but someone that can withhold the very aggressive attacks. I mean, we've seen just the filings in these cases, how aggressive both Combs and Jay-Z's lawyers have been when it comes to going after these victims. So you want to make sure that if you're a prosecutor, hey, this is someone that's going to hold up, because the entire case really comes down to this victim testimony. I mean, obviously, to the extent that there's video evidence, that's great. That's the best of all, because video doesn't lie. But we're talking about sex acts that happen behind closed doors. So we really need the individuals who participated in them to come and tell their story to the jury. So I think the prosecution, like I said, is going to have maybe 5 to 10 of their best witnesses. So they're going to have to disclose those witnesses to the defense and any prior statements that they've made. Obviously, there's one-way disclosure in criminal procedure. The defense doesn't have to do anything. The prosecution has to give over those names, give over those statements, so the defense will absolutely have the opportunity to prepare for the cross-examination.
We've talked about what we expect from both sides. The fact that Diddy's team is going to say, yeah, we had these freak-offs, but they were consensual. And then, as you just mentioned, the incredible testimony we can expect from the prosecution, these witnesses that were involved. So that's kind of what we can expect in May when it comes time for trial. But as of now, what are these federal prosecutors doing to prepare and make sure they have an airtight case?
They're really preparing those witnesses, and they're trying to establish one of three things. The difference between sex trafficking and consensual sex is force, fraud, or coercion. They are going through their victims and they're saying, how can I establish force? How can I establish coercion?
Changes how people see.
Way people view everything else. Suddenly, past events appear different. Past statements sound different. Everything begins to be interpreted through a new lens. People start asking new questions. Not only what's happening now, but what led to this point? What may have been overlooked? What else hasn't been revealed? And those questions don't remain quiet. They spread. Questions don't require proof to gain attention. They only need interest. And right now, interest is everywhere. This is where things become even more unstable. The longer the situation continues without clarity, the more people begin answering those questions themselves, not with facts, but with assumptions, speculation, and narratives that feel convincing simply because they are repeated so often. That's how stories grow beyond anyone's control. Not through confirmation, but through repetition. Eventually, the original report becomes only one part of it. That's what keeps it moving. Not certainty, not proof.
Conversation.
Model inmate, remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond, He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison, that he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too. Home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented when we spoke a few weeks ago to renowned bail bondsman, to the celebrities, by the way, to the stars, Ira Judelson, who apparently had been working with Combs' team behind the scenes on working to secure his release. Here's what he said about a new package.
And that larger conversation is being built in real time, layer by layer, reaction by reaction, without a solid foundation underneath it. That's what makes situations like this risky. Narratives created that way can go anywhere. They can intensify, they can fall apart, they can evolve into something completely different, but they never stay still. And this situation certainly isn't staying still. Now let's talk about control, because control is what seems to be slipping away. When things are stable, the narrative remains controlled. Statements are carefully measured. Reactions are predictable. But when something like this enters a conversation, that control weakens. The discussion starts moving faster than anyone can manage, faster than responses, faster than clarification, and faster than corrections. And once that happens, the story begins moving on its own. That's where things stand right now. A situation where the narrative is no longer being guided. It is being driven by reaction. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. What you're witnessing is not simply a legal development. It's a shift in perception, a shift in tone. A shift from uncertainty towards something that feels heavier, more serious, and more permanent, even if it may not actually be. And that shift is what keeps people engaged. Because people don't just want updates. They want understanding. They want clarity. They want to know where all of this is heading. But instead of answers, they're getting movement. Constant, unpredictable movement. New reactions, new interpretations, and new layers being added to a story that still lacks a clear conclusion. That's why the conversation refuses to slow down. It hasn't reached a resolution. It's still evolving, still expanding, and still attracting attention with every passing moment. The question everyone keeps asking is simple. Where does this go next? Does it become clearer? Does it get corrected? Or does it escalate even further? Right now, nobody knows. And that uncertainty is driving everything. As long as there is no clear answer, every possibility remains open. And open possibilities keep people watching. They keep people talking. They keep the entire story alive. That's where things stand today. Not confirmed, not settled, just continuing to grow. A situation fueled by reaction, interpretation, and the weight of something that feels important even without complete clarity. And until that clarity arrives, the story doesn't end. It doesn't slow down. It remains at the center of attention because whether people believe it, doubt it, or question every part of it, they're still paying attention.